Good morning, everyone. So today I'll be talking to you about the back of the neck and the suboccipital triangle. As you already know, there are quite a lot of muscles in the back of the neck which are enclosed by the prevertebral or the vertebral layer of deep cervical fascia. Okay, so and you have come across some of the muscles in the back of the neck in the dissection of upper limb, like the trapezius, the levator scapulae, okay, the splenius. These muscles are seen. Trapezius is a muscle of the upper limb. Okay, so there are important landmarks in the back of the neck. So if you go to the back in the midline, you will feel the most prominent vertebral spine, that is a C7 vertebral spine, and that is called the vertebra prominence because the spinous process of the C7 is quite prominent. Okay, um, that is the prominence of the C7 vertebra, and if you go up around this point, you will get the uh, external occipital protuberance. Okay, and extending from that, you will have two arching lines like this, which are called the superior nuchal line, and below them you will have the inferior nuchal lines. Okay, and there is a ridge, bony ridge, extending all the way from external occipital protuberance to the anterior portion of the uh, occipital bone, or up to the rim of the foramen magnum, and attached from this up to the C7 spine is a ligament. Okay, which is very useful in maintaining the posture of the neck. So then you have on either side there are muscles. Okay, and these muscles are called the back of the neck muscles, and just below the occipital region, in this region, when the neck is in anatomical position, there is a triangular space bounded by some of the muscles, which is in a horizontal plane when the neck is in the anatomical position. And that triangle is the suboccipital triangle, which will come to little later. Okay, so we'll be discussing the extent. So the extent of the neck is from the superior nuchal line, and in the midline the external occipital protuberance up to the C7 or the root of the neck. Okay, up to the C7 vertebra. That is the neck, and there are important muscles. Earlier, people were not very keen on the back musculature, but now we know quite a lot about the musculature in the back and how it works. But there are still some things which are not understood very much. The surface landmarks obviously include the external occipital protuberance and the mastoid processes on the either side, and the C7 vertebral spinous process and acromion process on the sides, because the muscles they descend down like this up to the acromion. Okay, the this back of the neck and the head, this region is supplied by the dorsal rami of the cervical spinal nerves. Okay, you have the C1, that is the first occipital nerve, which does not have any cutaneous innervation. Okay, it supplies the muscles, and C2 onwards, the dorsal rami supply the back of the lower part of the skull as well as the back of the neck, and as you go down, the medial branches initially in the neck and upper part of the thorax, the medial branches of the cervical spinal nerves give cutaneous innervation. But as you go down into the back, lower back, in the thoracic region, lower half of the thorax and the lumbar region, the dorsal rami medial branches do not provide cutaneous innervation that much. It will be the lateral branches that provide cutaneous innervation. So there are multiple cutaneous nerves that supply innervation to the back of the neck, particularly the lesser occipital nerve from the cervical plexus, that is branch of the ventral rami. Okay, and you have the greater occipital nerve, which is the C2 spinal nerve, and then the least occipital nerve or the third occipital nerve, which is third cervical, the dorsal ramus of the third cervical nerve, then the C4, C5, so on. Okay, this is a cutaneous nerve, and the ligamentum nuchae. It is a composite ligament which is made up of a median raphe dorsally, dorsal in the sense towards the back, towards the surface. There is interwoven fibers, the aponeurotic fibers from the trapezius muscle and the splenius capitis muscle. These interweave and they form a median raphe in the midline, which extends from the external occipital protuberance here all the way up to the C7 spine. Okay, and if you go deeper, this ligamentum nuchae becomes a different type of a ligament. It forms a septum basically, dividing the left and right symmetrically arranged 5 muscles, which form the bulk of the muscles in the back of the neck. These muscles are quite strong and they need to be strong because they need to hold the head in the upright position over the vertebral column. Okay, so these muscles, some of them are all the way from sacrum. Okay, and some of them are in, obviously they are uh, broken down into pieces or they have multiple fascicles, and these muscles either arise from the spinous processes or the transverse processes or the cervical and the thoracic vertebrae, and then they go and attach to the back of the head, mastoid process, and the occipital bone, and they help in moving the head as well as maintaining the correct posture of the head. Okay, this ligamentum nuchae has a lot of elastic fibers along with uh, bundles of collagen fibers. So that is why it is able to, uh, with least expense of energy, it can maintain the position of the head. Okay, then you already have seen the muscles in the lower back. There is a latissimus dorsi, okay, which is a muscle of the upper limb. Then the trapezius as well, which is also muscle of the upper limb. And if the two trapeziae are taken together, it appears like a trapezoid shape. Okay, and a single one will be triangular in shape. It is wide, extends all the way from the external occipital protuberance and up to the lower thoracic vertebral spinous processes. And the attachment of the superior nuchal line going from the external occipital protuberance goes almost to the middle of the superior nuchal line, where it merges or overlaps with the attachments or the insertion of the sternocleidomastoid muscle. Okay, and this attachment, lateral attachment, is aponeurotic or tendinous in nature, and the rest of the attachment is from the spinous processes and the interspinous ligaments or the supraspinous ligaments that is present between the spinous processes of the vertebral column, okay, cervical and thoracic vertebrae. Okay, and these fibers, they all converge and they go and attach onto the scapula, as you already know. Okay, so if you want to go to the back of the neck muscles, the proper back of the neck muscles, then you have to actually remove the trapezius. Okay, once you remove the trapezius, then you will reach the back of the neck muscles. Okay, and we'll also see the suboccipital triangle. What is it? Where is it located? And what is the definition? How to reach the suboccipital triangle? then the boundaries and contents. Okay, so these are the headings under which we will discuss today's topic, and probably lastly we will also see some of the important clinical aspects. So back of the neck is bounded above by the external occipital protuberance along the middle of the superior nuchal line, laterally the superior nuchal line, then the mastoid process. Okay, inferiorly it is the spine of the C7 vertebra in the middle, and laterally if you go, it is the acromion process of the scapula and the spine of the scapula. Okay, so neck is not very prominent in the or longer in children. As you go, the neck cervical vertebrae elongate and they then the neck will become apparent. So I have already mentioned these landmarks. The sternocleidomastoid is attached here. Okay, that gives you that attachment to the sternocleidomastoid will show you the prominent mastoid process. Then the trapezius can be felt going from the superior nuchal line up to the acromion. The external occipital protuberance is the most prominent landmark in the back of the skull. When you pass your fingers, then obviously you can see in the back of the skull there is a prominent protuberance which is called the external occipital protuberance, and then the mastoid process, as I told you already. Then the transverse process of atlas and the axis or the spinous process of the upper cervical vertebrae cannot be felt easily. Okay. Then the vertebra prominence or the C7 vertebra is called vertebra prominence because that has the most prominent spinous process which sticks straight backwards. Okay. So when we dissect the neck, when you were dissecting the upper limb, you realize that there is a lot of fat in the neck region when you try to reflect the skin to expose the trapezius muscle, right? So make a linear incision in the midline and then reflect the flaps of the skin. Then you will be you'll encounter the superficial fascia with variable amount of fat, and which is mixed with a lot of dense connective tissue as well. I mean, irregular connective tissue. If you go deeper, then you will see the interweaving fibers of the trapezius, and which is enclosed by your investing layer of deep cervical fascia. Okay. So if you reflect the skin, then you will get the superficial fascia, which you'll have to remove in order to see the deeper structures, and this whitish layer that you are seeing covering the trapezius is actually the investing layer of deep cervical fascia, and this region, that is the posterior triangle, okay, between the anterior border of trapezius and posterior border of sternocleidomastoid. Okay, and you can see the cutaneous nerves which pierce the trapezius and come out to supply the back of the neck. Okay, coming to the cutaneous nerves, we have the greater occipital nerve, which is the medial branch of the dorsal ramus of C2. Okay, and this is one of the thickest cutaneous nerves in the body, and it is purely sensory or cutaneous. It doesn't have any muscular supply. Then the third occipital nerve is from the dorsal ramus of the C2. Okay, so third occipital is from the dorsal ramus of C2. Greater occipital is from the dorsal ramus of dorsal ramus of C2 is greater occipital. Dorsal ramus of C3 is third occipital. And the lesser occipital is ventral ramus of C2. Okay. Then there are medial branches of the dorsal ramus C4 and C5 as well, which also supply the back of the neck. The dorsal ramus of C1 is actually purely motor, and it supplies the deeper muscles in the neck and the suboccipital triangle. Okay, so there are no cutaneous branches and there is no C1 dermatome. So dermatomes in the back of the neck are like this. C2 is the highest, which abuts or it is close to the trigeminal supply of the skull. In C2, C3 and C4 will come like this, and then after C4, C5 to T1 will be absent because they are taken into the hand, I mean the upper limb. So C4 will be next to T2 in the upper back. Okay. So C2, C3, C4, C5 will come, and then T2 will be around here. These dorsal rami have a medial branch and a lateral branch, except C1, S4, S5, and first coccygeal, which only have one branch, and the Z1 is only purely motor, and first coccygeal will only supply the lower, I mean, the central portion of the gluteal region. Okay. So above the level of T6, medial branches are cutaneous. Okay. So medial branches supply cutaneous innervation above the level of T6. In the lower part of the thoracic region, it will be the lateral branches of the dorsal rami. Okay. Dorsal rami of C1, C6, C7, C8, L4 and L5 do not give cutaneous branches here. Okay. Going to ligamentum nuchae. As I said, it is a central dividing ligament which is formed from, there are two components to it, the median raphe and the septal part. Okay. So some say it is an upward continuation of the supraspinous ligament, but it is actually the median raphe is formed by the interweaving fibers of the aponeurotic part of trapezius and the semispinalis and splenius capitis, not semispinalis, splenius capitis. Okay, and it is attached from the external occipital protuberance and the median eminence, which goes from the crest, external occipital crest, which extends from the external occipital protuberance up to the foramen magnum. It is attached along that, and then from there it goes to the spinous processes of the bifid cervical vertebrae all the way from C2 to C7. It may also attach to the atlas. Okay, the posterior tubercle of the atlas. Coming to the muscles, these are divided into superficial group, the intermediate group, and the deepest muscles. The superficial will include the sternocleidomastoid anteriorly, and the trapezius and the levator scapulae and the rhomboids posteriorly. Okay, so if you remove the trapezius muscle, then you will see these splenius capitis and the splenius cervicis, longissimus, and the semispinalis capitis muscles, which are intermediate group of muscles. Then the deepest group of muscles include the suboccipital muscles, and there are intrinsic muscles which are attached to the vertebral column, like the rotators spinals, and the longitudinal muscles like the components of erector spinae, that is the uh, spinalis and the longissimus, and then you also will have multifidus. Okay, so these are the deeper group of muscles. Okay, so there are superficial group, the intermediate group, and the deeper group. Superficial group will be trapezius and latissimus dorsi in the lower back, and levator scapulae, rhomboides minor and major. And the intermediate group will be serratus posterior superior and serratus posterior inferior, as well as some of the other muscles which I said in the neck. And the deep group, which includes the erector spinae, which are the long longitudinal muscles. Then we have oblique transversus spinals or rotator spinals. Then there are other interspinal, intertransversi, and suboccipital muscles and the multifidus muscles. Okay. So superficial group of muscles, trapezius and latissimus dorsi, have been already covered in upper limb, including the levator scapulae and rhomboides major and minor. They all act on the upper limb, and they are supplied by the ventral rami of spinal nerves. Okay. The intermediate group, this is the serratus posterior superior muscle, and this is serratus posterior inferior muscle. Okay, and deep to them you will have these other deeper muscles. Okay, so serratus posterior superior arises from C7 to T2 spines and inserts into the ribs. Okay, second to fifth ribs. Serratus posterior inferior arises from T11 and T12 spines and inserts into the 9 to 12 ribs. Okay, and probably their muscles of accessory muscles of respiration. These are also supplied with the ventral rami. Coming to the deeper groups, splenius is a wide band of muscle which has multiple fascicles. Some fibers extending from the splenius thoracis and splenius cervicis will also merge with the splenius capitis. Okay, and medially, if you go, splenius capitis interwoven fibers form the median raphe in the ligamentum nuchae. Okay, as you can see here. So that is the splenius capitis muscle. Okay, and then splenius cervicis will be slightly lateral to it, and it will attach to the mastoid process and the area below the superior nuchal line. Okay, and the splenius capitis attaches to the lateral aspect of the superior nuchal line, lateral to the origin of trapezius and attachment of the semispinalis capitis muscle. Okay, so origin is from half is from ligamentum nuchae and upper 4 to 6 thoracic spines, and splenius capitis forms the only the upper part of the floor of the posterior triangle between the attached parts of the where the trapezius and the sternocleidomastoid meet. Just at that point, there is a small area where the splenius capitis forms a little bit of floor of the posterior triangle. Okay, and insertion is into the mastoid process and to the superior nuchal line, which extends from the mastoid process up to the external occipital protuberance. Okay, and then the splenius cervicis is extension of the splenius thoracis. Okay, and it is again inserted into the posterior tubercle of the upper foot cervical vertebrae. Origin is from mastoid process or slightly medial to mastoid process. Okay, then erector spinae is a group of 3 longitudinal muscle bundles, which includes the spinalis in the middle or most medial. Then you have the longissimus, which is slightly intermediate, and the iliocostalis, which is the lateral most. Okay, and parts of which also extend upwards as the longissimus capitis and longissimus cervicis. Okay, and these are longitudinal muscles which are very powerful and are required for complex type of movements, which is like when you bend forward, flex your torso. Initiation of the movement is done by the anterior abdominal wall muscles, particularly the rectus abdominis. But the sustained flexion happens because of the controlled relaxation of the rectus spinae muscle, because otherwise the gravity would make your entire trunk bend too fast, which would snap things in the back. So these muscles gradually they relax and bring about the flexion of the trunk. Okay, so origin is from lower thoracic, lumbar spines, sacral, crest, inner part of the dorsal segment of the iliac crest, and quadratus lumborum and the ligament thoracolumbar fascia. Okay, so all those ligaments and fascia will give attachment to the erector spinae muscle, and they are enclosed in the the parts of the compartments of the thoracolumbar fascia, as you have already seen. Okay, so there are spinalis, longissimus, and iliopsoas from medial to lateral. Okay, so that is about the. There are different parts, but you can read up about them little later, or they have been covered in the back. Okay, so longissimus has three parts: the longissimus thoracis, longissimus cervicis, and the longissimus capitis. Okay, so that is again part of the erector spinae group. Okay, the longissimus thoracis, longissimus cervicis, and the longissimus capitis. And spinalis again has three parts: spinalis lumborum, spinalis thoracis, and spinalis cervicis muscles. Okay, so if you take this as the spinous process and the transverse processes, there is the body of the vertebra, and these are muscle fibers which are present between the transverse process and the spinous process. Okay, then deepest muscles are the rotatus and the multifidus muscles. Okay, coming to the muscles in the neck, the semispinalis capitis. So it occupies the upper half of the vertebral column, and it has three parts: the semispinalis thoracis, semispinalis capitis, and the semispinalis cervicis. Okay, so they cover the suboccipital triangle in the upper part. Okay, the semispinalis capitis forms part of the roof of the semispinal, the suboccipital triangle. Okay, so other deep muscles I mentioned already: interspinalis and the multifidus. Okay, so there are intertransverse muscles and the interspinous muscles, and then there are rotators which go from up to down. There are short rotators and the longer rotators. Okay. So anteriorly you have different muscles which are discussed in the paravertebral region, I guess, by Sirisar or Mysar, I don't know, but they have been discussed. There are other muscles like the lateral group, like the rectus capitis lateralis and rectus capitis anterior and rectus capitis posterior, which will come to later. Okay. So actions, in simple terms, they cause extension and flexion. That is, forward bending is flexion, backward bending is extension, and sideways bending is lateral flexion. Okay, and they are important in maintaining the posture of the body. Okay, and rotation of the trunk is also caused by multifidus and the rotators. Okay, coming to the suboccipital triangle, the suboccipital region is bounded above by the superior nuchal line, and in the middle of the superior nuchal line you have the external occipital protuberance, and going from the external occipital protuberance in the midline is the ligamentum nuchae. Okay, then on the lateral ends you have the mastoid processes here. Okay, and this region is bound anteriorly by these vertebral arches, the posterior vertebral arch of the posterior arch of the atlas, and the white fibrous band that you can see, which is the posterior atlanto-occipital membrane. Okay, so everything else is behind this. So those muscles that are present behind the atlanto-occipital membrane will be considered as the suboccipital muscles. That region is a suboccipital region, and you can see the landmarks. So this is external occipital protuberance, and there is a superior nuchal line. And if you come down, then there is inferior nuchal lines, and between them there is some area for muscle attachments. And if you come below, then the spine of the C2 vertebra or the axis can be felt. Okay, and here the transverse processes of the atlas can also be is also one of the important landmarks in the suboccipital region. Okay, in the superficial fascia in the suboccipital region, you will see the greater occipital nerve, which is the C2 dorsal ramus of the C2, and then the third occipital, which is the dorsal ramus of C3, and the terminal portion of the occipital artery, which is the posterior branch of the external carotid artery. Okay, there are some twigs of the lesser occipital nerve also might come here. Okay, then you have superficially the muscles which are sternocleidomastoid in the trapezius. If you remove them, then you will come to the splenius capitis. If you elevate that, if you cut and elevate, then you will see the semispinalis capitis. If you cut this and reflect, then you will see the muscles of the suboccipital triangle like this. The rectus capitis posterior minor, rectus capitis posterior major, then the obliquus capitis inferioris and obliquus capitis superioris, or obliquus capitis inferior and obliquus capitis superior. So the suboccipital triangle is formed by these muscles: the rectus capitis posterior major, then the obliquus capitis inferior, then the obliquus capitis superior. Okay, so these muscles form a boundaries of the suboccipital triangle. Okay, and these muscles are arranged like this. So some books mention the rectus capitis posterior major and minor as the medial boundaries of the suboccipital triangle, and inferolateral boundary is formed by the inferior oblique or the obliquus capitis inferior, and obliquus capitis superior forms the superolateral boundary of the suboccipital triangle. And the triangular area that is bounded by on either side by the rectus capitis posterior majors, there is a space here. That space is occupied by the rectus capitis posterior minor muscle, which is inserted into the medial aspect of the inferior nuchal line and the area underneath the inferior nuchal line on the occipital bone. Okay, so these are the boundaries of the suboccipital triangle. What are the boundaries? Rectus capitis posterior major, which arises, as you can see, from the spinous process of the axis vertebra, that is second cervical vertebra. Okay, central part of the tip of the spinous process of the second cervical vertebra, and goes and attaches on the lateral half of the inferior nuchal line, or area just below the inferior nuchal line. Okay, and obliquus capitis inferior arises again from the transverse process of the C2 vertebra and inserts into the tubercle on the transverse process of the atlas vertebra, that is a C1 vertebra. Then superior oblique arises from the transverse process of the C1 vertebra and attaches to the lateral part of the inferior nuchal line and area between the superior nuchal line and the inferior nuchal lines. Okay, so that is the muscles of forming the suboccipital triangle boundaries. Okay, and these muscles are supplied by, all of them are supplied by the suboccipital nerve or the dorsal ramus of C1, which is also called suboccipital nerve. all of these muscles are supplied by suboccipital nerve, and the main function is possibly the postural maintenance of the head, maintaining the posture of the head. And when they act in unison, that is all of them together, both the left and right parts together, they may probably bring about a little bit of extension of the head and rotation of the head or the atlas vertebra over the axis. Okay, so these are the muscles. Okay, I explained to you all the muscles together. The rectus capitis posterior minor arises from the posterior tubercle of the posterior arch of the atlas. On the posterior arch of the atlas, there is a tubercle on which the rectus capitis posterior minor arises from, and then it is inserted into the middle part of the area below the inferior nuchal line. That is also supplied by suboccipital nerve, and probably they extend the neck head, as I said, and that is the suboccipital triangle. So these muscles, which are overlying the deeper muscles, will form the roof of the suboccipital triangle. Okay, so that will be semispinalis and the splenius cervicis or splenius capitis. Semispinalis capitis and the splenius capitis and the longissimus muscle, these will form the roof, and the, if you can see, that is the posterior arch of the atlas, and attaching from the posterior arch of atlas there is a white fibrous tissue membrane which is called the posterior atlanto-occipital membrane, which forms the floor of the suboccipital triangle. So superior medially, rectus capitis posterior major forms the boundary. Superolaterally, obliquus capitis superior, and inferiorly, obliquus capitis inferior muscle. Okay. Roof is formed by semispinalis capitis, laterally by the longissimus capitis muscles. This is the semispinalis capitis and longissimus capitis. Okay, semispinalis capitis and splenius capitis and longissimus capitis, and the in the roof, going from above upwards, will be the greater occipital nerve. That is the dorsal ramus of C2 nerve will go up to supply the back of the neck and the scalp, and there will be a branch of the occipital artery, or the trunk of the occipital artery itself can be seen in the lateral aspect of the suboccipital triangle like this. You can see that is greater occipital nerve going across like this, and that is the occipital artery. Okay. So greater occipital nerve will also be a content of the content in the roof, and this is the third occipital nerve, and there is a occipital artery which will send a posterior branch to supply the muscles in the suboccipital region, and the floor is formed by posterior atlanto-occipital membrane. Okay, and the arch of the posterior arch of the atlas. Okay. Coming to the contents, the important content of the suboccipital triangle is the vertebral artery, the third part of the vertebral artery, which exits the transverse process or the foramina transversarium of the first, that is axis vertebra, atlas vertebra, then lies on a groove on the posterior arch of the atlas, and just underneath that you will have the suboccipital nerve. Okay, so these are the important structures which are contents of the suboccipital triangle. Okay, along with that you will also have vertebrobasilar plexus of veins. Okay, so third part of vertebral artery emerges from the foramina transversarium and then lies on a groove on the posterior arch of the atlas, then pierces the atlanto-occipital membrane, and then goes medially to enter the cranial cavity through the uh, foramen magnum till it pierces this membrane and goes in. That part is a that part of the third part of the vertebral artery is the content of the suboccipital triangle. Then you have the suboccipital or the vertebrobasilar venous plexus. Okay, so vertebral artery, which is a branch from the first part of the cervical, the subclavian artery, enters the transverse process of the C6 vertebra, then ascends up in the foraminal transverse area to go up to the transverse process of the atlas, then goes back on the posterior arch of the atlas to appear in the appear in the suboccipital triangle. Okay, and then it lies on the vertebral posterior arch of the atlas and then goes into the cranial cavity. Okay, and the dorsal ramus of the C1 will lie below the. So this is the vertebral artery. See whether that is the first part, the third part of the vertebral artery, and below that you will have the dorsal ramus of the C1. And the C1 nerve will come and then it will divide into dorsal branch. The ventral branch will go front, and the dorsal branch will be present in the suboccipital triangle. So it has no cutaneous branches, only muscular branches. It supplies all the, as you can see, it supplies all the suboccipital muscles. So peculiarity of C1, C2. So in suboccipital venous plexus, it is joined by or formed by occipital vein, the transverse sinus, and the internal vertebral venous plexus. Okay, transverse sinus is in the dural venous sinuses, part of dural venous sinuses, which will join with the internal vertebral plexus, which come out and form a plexus in the suboccipital region, and these drain into the vertebral veins. So many people suffer from diseases of the vertebral column, and one of the diseases that affects the vertebral column is called the spondylosis or spondylitis. If there is inflammation, then that is spondylitis. When there is degenerative changes, age-related degenerative changes, that is spondylosis. The neck pain need not always be from spondylosis or spondylitis. It can be because of inflammation of the trapezius, which is called the trapezitis. Okay, and these neck muscles become rigid or they are spasmodic when there is inflammation of the meninges. If there is inflammation of the meninges, which is called meningitis, then you may experience neck rigidity that is commonly seen in meningitis. Then you can also experience pain in the back of the skull because of the occipital neuralgia. When C2, that is the greater occipital nerve, gets compressed somehow, or the lesser occipital nerve also can get compressed, that leads to radicular pain in the posterior part of the neck and the head. Cervical radiculopathy. Most of the nerves in the brachial plexus are derived from the cervical spinal nerves. If there is a degenerative change or a disc bulge, if the intervertebral disc between the cervical vertebrae is compressed and it protrudes out, the nucleus pulposus, if it protrudes out, then it may cause compression of the roots of the brachial plexus, which presents as pain radiating down the upper limb. Okay, so that is called cervical radiculopathy. And in this suboccipital triangle, you can also do something called as a cisternal puncture to collect CSF from the cisterna magna. Okay, so that is a CSF filled space, subarachnoid space below the cerebellum. You can pass a needle just below, just above the posterior arch of the atlas, and then we can collect CSF. But because it is associated with higher complications, we don't do it. We perform CSF collection from lumbar region. Okay. Klippel-Feil syndrome is a congenital fusion of the cervical vertebrae, which is characterized by short neck, low hairline, and restricted movements. Okay, and atlas can be attached or fused with the occipital bone, or it can be fused with the atlas also. Okay, when it is fused with the occipital bone, it may cause compression of the medulla oblongata. As you can see here, this is fused with the occipital bone. Syringomyelia is a degenerative disease of the spinal cord which progresses and causes damage to the gray matter in the spinal cord. Okay, dilatation of the central canal. Okay, so important. One more important clinical aspect is when hanging, when somebody hangs, then the odontoid process, the dens, fractures and it goes and compresses the medulla oblongata, which contains the important respiratory and cardiac centers. Compression of those will suddenly cause death. Okay, I think that is enough. Thank you everyone for listening patiently. You can carry on with your next class. I'll post the assignment a little later. Okay.